Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. As always, my name is Sam, and I'm joined by a hero to many of us, James Anir. How are you, my good friend?
I am very well. Thank you, Sam. I'm not quite sure what to do with the compliment.
Well, just take
I
it
will
and
just
run with it.
take it and say thank you. So I'm doing
Good.
great. No special hats today.
Awesome. Thank you for that. You are a hero. I see so many people who just love your heart and what you're sharing. You've just come out of a big, long intensive. So you and Sharon have been working overtime. I know that you guys love intensives, but they can be exhausting because you're not just doing these little plug and go intensives, right? You're doing tailor-made intensives for people in crisis.
Yeah, they really are. So I mean, we always have agenda items, right? But everything else is we meet people exactly where they are, and we have so many sort of tools or things we can use, right? That we're able to pick and choose what really will work for that person. And so, we're also the only place I think that we are, if we're seeing for the actor, the unfaithful, we are in touch with the betrayed partner every single day. Whereas most people have maybe a family day or a family hour or something like that. We are in touch every day because we know how torturous it is for them to be sitting at home wondering what's going on and what's happening.
Yeah. And for those of you that are watching and listening, it's important that you understand they do individual intensives as well, not just couple intensives. So if you're in your own journey and you're like, man, I don't know that my partner is going to want to do work with me, well, that's okay. It's not optimal, but you can do work on you. And we hope that today is another opportunity to do some really good work on you. So today's question is we jump out into the waters of Ask the Unfaithful. Today's question, I think, helps bring home the fact that we unfaithful need to look at what our choices have cost us and to be aware of what they've cost us, because if we can be aware of what they've cost us but also cost our partner or spouse, it helps us with our relapse prevention. It helps us with getting healthy. It helps us be a better human being. It helps us understand that our choices have consequences. And today's question is, what are the consequences of betrayal for the unfaithful? Now, you might be watching and listening and think, oh my gosh, do we really need to talk about this? Absolutely, we do, because we have to help the betrayed wrap their mind around so many different things that have happened, but we also have to help the unfaithful begin to make sense of their new life based upon the choices that they've made. James, why don't you make all that make sense from the aspect of how the unfaithful needs to understand their consequences for their actions?
You know, um, the consequences for our actions are ongoing, right? From the moment that we are unfaithful, even in thought, there are consequences on varying levels. Some of them are very much tangible, right, in the world, and some of them are deeply emotional. Um, and so, we're not always, most of the time prior, we're not really aware of what is happening to us. We just know sort of our life is devolving, is coming apart. So what this can amount to today is that we're trying to break through whatever denial is left, and it'd be surprising, or it is surprising, how much is going on. I mean, I was several months into recovery and was still sort of in denial about the depth of the things that had happened, absolutely to Sharon, but also to me. And so really this is about making everybody aware of them. So some of them you're going to know already, and then again some others you might not, and it's really vital to know what you're up against and what some of the things that are going to need your attention.
I'll never forget, I was, I think, a couple of weeks after D-Day, and I was flying out to go be with a guy who really wanted to help me. And I was talking to an investor, and I was rattling off some things about what had happened. And he stopped me and he said, "You know, Sam, I don't hear much ownership. I don't hear much humility. I don't hear much of any kind of a heart of awareness of what you've done and the people that you've affected and the choices that you've made. Don't call me again until that's there."
Yeah.
And I was in an airport, shook with, oh my gosh. And I'll tell you, I had a 2.5 hour flight to get back home. And that whole flight, I thought about that conversation. I can remember that conversation so vividly, even now, almost 20 years later. I remember the spirit, the heart of what he said to me, the no nonsense approach. And it was part of the waking up. I was such a mess, it wasn't enough to just be the wake up button, but it was part of the process that woke me up. So, as I think you said it best, denial. We can be in such denial. So, how do we navigate through this?
Well, one of the reasons that we're kind of looking at what we've done to ourselves is because like everybody knows we have a problem with empathy, right? And we have to learn how to be empathetic. And so one of the reasons that we're looking at ourselves right now is because we sure know how to be selfish.
Yeah.
We know that inside and out. So if we know how this is affecting us negatively, it can give us impetus to do this recovery thing for ourselves. Because if we are doing it for somebody else, we're going to fail at it because that can't sustain.
Mm,
That's sort of a human nature thing. It sounds really ugly. I'd love to say that everybody could be completely altruistic and unselfish, and that just isn't true. And so
right.
we have to angle in on how has this hurt me? I don't want to do that anymore. That allows us to learn how to be empathetic to our partners and everybody else that we've hurt. And I know that sounds paradoxical, and I am one who will say that all of our solutions are in the paradox. So let's take a look at what these things are. And when we're new to recovery, we sort of have this hope, I guess, or expectation that all the damage that we've done, which we don't even see all of it by remember,
Right.
right? But we're hoping it'll just slide by and nobody will notice and it'll just go away, right? And at the very least, that nobody will bring it up, right? And we also convince ourselves that it's not nearly as big as it is, right? Because if we had to face that reality, it would tear us apart. And yet we need to face that reality. So because we've
Because
got,
we minimize it. We love
yeah,
to minimize.
yeah,
Minimizing is all about making ourselves feel better, right?
right. Yeah, absolutely. So, betrayed partners are very used to, not like in a good way, their feelings being minimized, their feeling, the unfaithful rationalizing and all the izing that we've talked about before, right? And yet we also do it to ourselves so that we can essentially live with it. And even the danger there, of course, is that it keeps us in denial and we keep acting out. So minimizing, we do internally, we do it to ourselves all the time. We're essentially gaslighting ourselves
And
into,
this is part of our distorted thinking, right?
yes, absolutely. So, you know, our distorted thinking is that we can justify, we think that our actions aren't really harming anybody else, maybe us, but what do we matter? And it's not hurting anybody else. So there you go. But guess what? The rest of the world doesn't share that kind of thinking. And so there are always consequences for our actions. Um, Consequences, which is really what we're talking about today, are, and I can't take credit for this. This is Patrick Carnes, and a lot of Patrick Carnes' work has really informed today's talk. Um, he talks about consequences being the signposts to reality, right? So consequences essentially are unavoidable for
Right.
poor behavior, and so as those consequences come up, they are the signposts that can say you're not living in reality, you're living in delusion, right? Because none of what we convince ourselves is real. And largely we're convincing ourselves that it's okay so that we don't have to feel the pain of busting out of our integrity.
Because if we were to understand all that we've done, how we've changed our family's life, our children's lives, our partner or spouse's lives, if we were to grab hold of that early on, I think it would be a lot. So, at some level, whether it be within evolution or creation and everything in between, the fact is there is a part of the power of the process of us coming to an awareness of just how much our choices have cost us. And
Yeah.
it takes someone like you, and it takes maybe someone like me to help take an unfaithful through a process to go, hey man, hey woman, this is going to hurt and this is going to be expensive, and I'm going to be here for you, but this is not as easy as you think it's going to be, right?
As the bills come due, right? And it is not cheap.
No.
So much pain, and there's pain in the things that we've caused, but also in recovery, because that is frankly facing reality and doing something about it. So that bill has come due, and we have to pay it one way or the other. Now, um, we're going to avoid it as long as possible through denial, right? But ultimately, discovery is going to come one way or another, whether it's by our partner, by a cop, by our friends around us. And there are costs to all of that. So, the types of consequences are myriad.
Yeah.
What we've tried to do here that we're getting into now is the types of consequences and some of the things that come under those types of consequences. So you can actually almost look at this like, okay, is that happening to me? Is that happening to me? Have I done that? And so on. And I think that's going to be really helpful to really bring that reality closer, and also to give you this kind of idea of, oh wow, that I didn't know I had to work on that. I've got to work on that for me at the very least.
Yeah, bringing it to the forefront I think is key.
Yeah.
So let's start with emotional. So let's talk about the emotional consequences.
So we'll start with a big one, right? And in the emotional consequences, and they're all big, but it's kind of this loss of knowledge of who we are, but also attachment to ourselves. Because if we identify deeply, our highest self, where we're living within our values and living in our integrity, essentially, that's what our highest self is. Um, we lose attachment to that, and we feel like we're two separate people. And in fact, if you look at our actions, it looks like we're two separate people. So
It
that is,
looks like we're splitting, right?
yeah, absolutely splitting ourselves. I mean, we're not multiple personalities, right? But wow, you really could look at it from the outside and go, wow, here's someone who's cheating on their partner, who's telling lies to their entire family, to their workmates, to their friends, in order to sustain this life, right? And here's the person that is actually in those things, and they're maintaining. How are we maintaining this without conflict? We're not. There's
Right.
huge conflict, and that can lead to a number of things. Anxiety, huge anxiety. We're not talking little. We just worked with somebody who had panic attacks, right? I mean, that is as big as anxiety gets. you feel like you're going to die in a panic attack if you've ever experienced one. It literally, a lot of people will go to the hospital thinking they're having a heart attack. Depression. And I'm not talking just sadness. I mean, loneliness, yes, and sadness in that. But do you know that there's a death rate to this, to
Yeah.
cheating? And granted, there's all kinds from single affairs to acting out sexually, one night stand, all the way up through compulsive and then addictive. And by the way, brain scans do not show a difference between compulsion and addiction when it comes to sexual stuff. Just a thought. I was doing some research yesterday. Very interesting. I don't know. I'm a nerd. But the problem is the highest, everybody says, oh, well, what's a death rate? That we can see a death rate for heroin addiction, for alcoholism, sex addiction or compulsion and so on. Depression leads to suicide,
Mm.
right? And yeah, it's not everybody, but I can tell you in my recovery, well, actually one time, a long time before I even knew I had a problem, I attempted it. I failed miserably, thankfully,
Right.
would never have thought that I would try it again. But then 3 months into recovery, I am taking this exit ramp and I'm talking to my sponsor and he's talking to me and trying to talk me down. And I was hitting the accelerator like I was going to go up through the red light and hit the wall. And he managed to say, come over now. Instead of going, I was actually heading to a meeting and I did. And he
Mm.
saved my life, literally. I mean, I was in that kind of space. So it's real. And that this is the highest cause of death amongst people who act out sexually. And
Mm.
even if not that, we get suicidal ideation, which can be, I wish this would all end. I can't do this. I can't be this person. I'm stuck. I just can't do this. It needs to end. It can be as simple as that, or two, actually developing a plan. And we have attempts, and those things come to fruition, unfortunately, very sadly. If you look at the Ashley Madison thing, you know how many people committed suicide after the hackers got into that, under
Oh, yeah.
threat of not having been exposed necessarily, but under
Right.
threat of it. So this isolation and loneliness follows, right? It follows acting out and continual acting out. That can lead to despair, hopelessness. Even in early recovery, when, I was in 12 step, there's a lot of people around me saying, hey, man, you can do this. I just didn't believe in myself. I was trying to have faith in them because they'd done it. But man, I was just had no direction. I just felt like I was at the absolute bottom. And you know what? I needed to be there.
And at some level, we need to bottom out. I mean, that's part of recovery is us bottoming out and then finding people who give us actual help and not little euphemisms or stupid little sayings that aren't helping us and not giving us the tools that we need. And it's painful. And I remember there was so much despair. I went from having a group of people around me, a massive amount of people around me, to having one friend that stood by me. Everybody else disintegrated.
Yeah.
And then I had my spouse who was in her own private hell and despair and certainly wasn't there to support me and me placing on her the need for her to support me and the consequences that were from my own doing were is massively unfair. And certainly I wasn't going to look to my kids. They were too young. But there is the need to be able to find relationships, but the need that we also have to be alone and realize all of these other crutches that we have been leaning on, finances, being wanted, being worshiped, being adored, being desired, the power, the big house, you name it materialistically, there has to come a point where those things become so less important than what we're talking about. Would
Yeah,
you agree?
absolutely, without a doubt. Um, if our own salvation, if you will, I know that's a very faith-based word, but it really is. We have to save ourselves, right? With help. Um,
Yes.
but we can't see what reality is. We can't, and if we can't see what reality is, I'm not just talking about our what we've done reality or how we're living reality, but also the reality of what recovery looks like, the kind of work it takes, and also what could be doing that work, right? Because that's reality too. That's no fairy tale. You're living it. I'm living it. If I could look at the first meeting I went to, there were actually, I think, 25 people in it. At least 15 of those people on that particular day had more than 5 years recovery, some of them
Mm.
20, right? And so, I could learn, I could see that. It took me a little while to be able to say, I can have faith in them. I had a real problem at that point with my own faith, right? So I had to sort of attach to, okay, these people have had some experience here. I can believe in what they've done, right? And then that led me back to my faith um, over time. And so that was helpful, right? Not everybody has beliefs, and so they can actually believe in that power, that there are programs and people who can help. So
Yeah.
the problem with living in delusion, essentially, which is the loss of our own reality, is we can't tell which direction is right, which direction is wrong. I mean, we learned supposedly right from wrong, right? But as the Pink Floyd song goes, so you think you can tell the difference between heaven and hell? Blue
Well,
sky
and that's
from
the
the paint.
thing. Yeah, because we are not at any level sober. And that's not to say that we're all addicts. That's a term that says we're not of sober mind, we're not of sober thought. We've been living in this cloud. And to think that we're going to come out of the affair or the addiction and magically see things for the way they are is it just is not accurate. And that we're going to go right back into regular life after this nuclear bomb has gone off is just not realistic.
No, I mean, so you talk about sobriety of thought, but there's also emotional sobriety, right?
Yeah.
Emotional recovery, because sobriety is the sort of being clean, the stopping, right? And then this is my definition. And then there's recovery, which is the growth out of that. One hopes, like the phoenix from the ashes. Um,
Right.
so, we have to get to reality at all costs, because that's what is going to lead us into saving ourselves. Um, other things in the emotional consequences arena, this we have a loss of interest in life, a loss of ability to just enjoy the regular things in life. And there's a reason for this. Everything that we've done acting out. Okay, so I'll just do it this way. We'll do a longer one on this at some point, but here's our normal pleasure point, right? So, whatever you like, a steak. I like surfing. That might be a bit higher because there's a little bit more of an adrenaline bump with the dopamine. But this is roughly 100% dopamine release, which is your happy hormone. Right now, every time we act out, we get woo right up here, right? Boom, boom, boom. And eventually, with enough acting out, this becomes our false pleasure point. And so we have to have that 400%, 700% or more. Believe it or not, internet pornography, 1100% dopamine release.
Mm.
1100. That's the same as heroin and cocaine combined. So to say, here we are, this becomes our false pleasure point. That why would we be interested in life here?
Yeah.
There's no way to be, right? So we have this inability, it's called anhedonia, this inability to feel pleasure, right? Unless, of course, we're getting that much of a bump, right? So that's really important. And then another thing that happens emotionally is, as the future's the doors. Sorry, I don't know why I put that in the outline. The future's uncertain and the end is always near.
Yeah. Yes.
For future tripping, right? We know this cloud that we're on, this pink cloud we're gonna come crashing down at some point. We know that's gonna happen, right? So we live in fear of that before discovery, and then discovery happens, and it does happen, right? And then we start future tripping about, oh, is this going to be divorce? Is this salvageable? Am I even going to be able to be a human being again? Right. And that future tripping keeps us out of the most important place, and that's the present.
Mm.
Because if we are not here in the present, we cannot be present for anybody else. And we certainly can't focus on what needs to happen right now. And then there's that emotional exhaustion, right? Maintaining
Well,
lives and so on.
yeah, because like you said, we've been living two different lives. And so we hit a point of major exhaustion. And then we're exhausted, but we're trying to work on our family. We're trying to work on ourselves. We're trying to be there for our partner. And oftentimes, I know that this seems unbelievable, but the truth is, we're not very good at being worried about other people. We're pretty good at worrying about ourselves. So we focus and fixate on ourselves while our betrayed is over here losing their mind because we're still just focused on our own pain.
Yeah, and you know what? Now we have to learn how to be focused on our own recovery, but also on relational recovery, right? And relational recovery is about being focused on our betrayed and helping them heal in the ways that it's myriad ways, but we have talked about that in the past, and we'll continue to talk about it. But that feels like, on one hand, when we are focused on our own recovery, that can feel to a partner like, here he is being selfish again. The difference is that it's about growth, and that growth is necessary for this relational recovery to continue to work and blossom. A lot of times people will forget the relational part, and they'll just focus, and it feels really good. I'm accomplishing all this, I've stopped all these behaviors and so on.
Look
And
at me, look at me, look how great I am.
exactly. That you got the point. Dead on. It's still feeding the same stuff. And the
Yeah.
same stuff that we were looking for outside. Now we're getting this recovery work done for ourselves, the sober work, right? And it feels good. And now we're like this, but our partner's sitting there going, uh, hello, what
Right.
over
What about
here?
me?
And that's the
What about
relational
me?
part. And that's why relational recovery is so, so important. Um, so shall we move to the physical consequences, the potential physical consequences? We talked about exhaustion. Um, there's a lot of potential physical things that can happen. Your body actually breaks down. You know why? Because we're always under stress. So we have these cortisol dumps. Well, cortisol is an anti-inflammatory in the body, right? So it's necessary. It helps us with headaches. It helps us with inflammation, wounds, and so on. But the problem is when it gets these massive dumps of it into our body, it's actually harmful. It'll break down the stomach lining. It'll break down, which allows for rheumatoid arthritis. It can long-term cause weight gain, diabetes, eye issues, ulcers, appetite changes, so rapid or extreme weight loss, sleep issues. So this is cortisol and dopamine related. I won't get into all the heavy science. So another possible physical consequence are STDs. So if this applies to you, it would be a good idea to go and get an STD panel done.
Absolutely. There's the emotional, there's the physical, but for me, because I do come from faith, I really damaged my faith. We know that not everybody comes from faith. You might be agnostic or atheist or everything in between. But this does damage us, living two separate lives, whether we come from faith or not. This does damage our ability to see life as it is. And if we come from faith, I know for me, I was massively disoriented. I was massively confused. And in many respects, I hated myself because I was this person of faith, but yet I had this affair. So, how do you walk people through helping their spirituality if they do subscribe to spirituality, or if they don't? How do you help them begin to make sense out of the world when they have lived such a contradiction to maybe what they believed before?
I think that where we really are with that is that a lot of times we abandon our spiritual beliefs because they're in such contrast with what we're doing, right? Weirdly or paradoxically, as I love that word, by doing that, we actually feel abandoned by our higher power, be that God or a higher power by a different name, right? So it's I know it's paradoxical, but when we abandon our spiritual beliefs, we can feel abandoned by God or a higher power. And
Absolutely.
that then triggers a lot of that childhood stuff if we have stuff in that abandonment rejection realm. And then that causes us to want to self-soothe more. And acting out is self-soothing, right? It's not
Yeah.
healthy self-soothing, but it is self-soothing. So then we end up with this spiritual emptiness, sort of, and it feels like being, I don't know, to me it felt like being dead inside, hollowed out, like somebody had taken, like when you take scoops out of a melon or something, right? Just totally hollowed out, and nothing able to fulfill me. So I kept, of course, searching for it in places that were never going to fill me. Um, with this, it comes like this disconnection from
Yeah.
ourselves, but also from the world, right? So we feel like we're free floating, like a ship without a rudder. There's another big thing here is there's something called hope.
Yeah.
And hope, I kind of do this in reverse, but hope really is made up of faith plus belief, right? So, okay, again, whatever that means to the person watching, right? So I'll often so I had an atheist in an intensive once. Well, we did, but I was doing the first part of it. And he said, I can't go to 12 step. And he was full on addict. So 12 step would have been appropriate, right?
Right.
I'm like, why? And he says, because they're always talking about God. I'm like, actually, technically, they're always talking about spirituality. But he didn't want to buy that either. I said, all right, do you have hope? Do you have hope for yourself or even for your marriage? And he goes, yeah, I do. I'm here. I'm like, okay, well, hope means that you have some level of faith somewhere in something. And he's like, okay. And I said, you don't have to ever believe in God or a higher power of sort of a divine sort, but you can believe that there are things that can help you and processes, and you already do because you have hope, right? So that's really important. When we're disconnected from any kind of belief system or any kind of spirituality, we cease to have hope. That's a very hopeless place to be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
We would be remiss as we're rebuilding our operating system. A lot of times these consequences come professionally as well, right? I know it did for me. I know it's come for many men and women who suffer the loss of so much because of their choices.
Yeah, you can even take this down to, in one respect, time. So let's say that you're in the grips of porn, right? Compulsion, addiction, whatever that is. How many people out there could say that they have never looked at porn at work? You know, you know how many billions of hours are lost to pornography
Yeah.
in corporations across the world? Billions. And so that means, guess what else you're gonna lose? Productivity, right? So suddenly you're not going to be the employee you once were. You're not going to be getting stuff done. You're not going to be working to your capacity. And we have seen many, many people who have lost their jobs, And not just sometimes because it's been discovered by IT or whatever, but also, and it doesn't have to be pornography. It can be spending time on dating apps or whatever, right? But acting out. And
Yeah.
so they've lost their jobs because of their productivity. And it's a highly competitive workplace out there. I mean, probably forever, but right now, certainly. And then there have been even more who have been demoted, right? Why? Because now their productivity's off, but they can't be trusted to get stuff done on time.
Yes.
They start spending more time, more hours at work just to get the same amount of work done. And guess what happens with that? Takes away from family time, right? Loss of coworker respect because coworkers are going to know maybe more than bosses, right? Loss of opportunities because the guy who's at who or the woman who's there working to their capacity and busting their butt about work is certainly going to get the promotions, the projects and such above somebody who's doing the opposite. And then lastly, you start getting bored with what you're doing, with the kind of work you're doing, and you lose interest. And that then devolves into a situation where you really hate going to work, which is no place to be since we spend an awful lot of time at it.
Yeah. And at some level, I mean, we open up the door to so many other different opportunities for consequences. You've talked about legal at some level, you intimated to it, but it runs down the rabbit hole that there comes a point for some people where they think, oh my gosh, how deep is this going to go? How far are my consequences going to chase me?
Yeah. I mean, lawsuits, right? Court involvement. So being arrested, being in front of a judge, that's all public, man. Jail, even depending upon what somebody might have done. Um, Certainly beyond the court stuff, loss of friendships, loss of respect, no time for the friendships, right? Loss of your honor. That's a big one. And people can feel that radiating off of you when you are living outside of your integrity and are losing your honor. People feel it because you're not acting the same. You're moody, you're irritable, you're distant,
Right.
all of those things. So they know something's wrong, but there's something about honor, man, that is just, you can feel it. You could end up stealing. Or let's say this, embezzling even. Now people do that to supply themselves with money, right?
Yeah.
Embezzling money. That's rare, certainly, but it happens. But what isn't rare is theft of time. So we talk
Hmm.
about those billions of hours, and that is still theft, right? So
Yeah.
that's breaking your morals. And not just that moral, we're breaking our morals across the board. We're busting out of values. We're also busting our moral compass, right? So that it's just spinning now. You don't have a rudder and you don't have a compass. And then money, finances, right? Like divorce isn't cheap. Recovery's not cheap, although it's cheaper than divorce a lot of times. Acting out isn't cheap either. So when we have a certain test that we give, that assesses money and work styles and money spent, the largest amount of money that somebody has spent on their acting out outside of their marriage is one that we've come across $1.2 million.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we often see very affluent people, um, and but $1.2 million
Yeah.
spent on acting out, that's a lot of money. But then if we scale that, to somebody who isn't making a ton of money to begin with, you're still talking people spending 40 grand, 20 grand, 5 grand.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, man. And that really impacts. And then that has to be kept secret from the partner because they can't know, of course, right? But then where's the college fund? Where's this money gone? Why haven't we paid our mortgage this month? These things
Yeah.
very, very real. And it's one of the reasons why in recovery, it's really best to get to a place where there's a financial recovery too, which means sharing where you are, where the family is financially, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that.
And what we haven't covered yet, we saved for the last because it's somewhat obvious, but yet it is not obvious, and that is the fact of what our choices do to our family, what our choices do to our kids, to our partner. And we could, what you mentioned, 1.5 or some odd million dollars. At the end of the day, that doesn't compare to the damage that we do to another human being by our choices, and sometimes acting out multiple times.
Yeah.
And as we wind down our conversation, why don't you talk a little bit just about how our family is devastated at these actions? Because we couldn't put a number on the emotional upheaval this creates for oftentimes generations to come.
Yeah. Trauma is generational. There's no two ways about that. It can be passed down to our kids, this trauma and of this cheating. So, for the unfaithful, there's a big risk of losing your partner, of being divorced, of losing everything that goes with that. Right? That's what we're risking. So you know, it's a huge impetus to make repairs here, reparations, to fix this. But the family, that's no small thing because that's betrayal, right?
Well, it's proven by the fact if we were to do a poll with all the unfaithfuls and ask them, hey, how many of you know if your mom or dad were unfaithful themselves? I think the numbers would be staggering because if I look at my bloodline and my family, I know for a fact that my dad was unfaithful, if not multiple times. And how many of us are suffering because of what our fathers and mothers may have done, and we're just completely unaware of it. And then we find people like you that help us walk down the road of clarity and healing to understand how we got to this point. Because don't you think it's important that we understand how we got to this point, not just as betrayed, but unfaithful, really?
Yeah, hugely important. I mean, we've talked about it before, our own family of origin, but also our stories throughout life until this very moment. Um, and then, the whys. Why is this happening? Why did this happen? Always that curious why I like to talk about that can stop this stuff in its tracks when it's happening. But also we've got to look at what our history is. History just means story, right? Our story from the past. So what is
Yeah.
it? We understand it. We can do something about it. Also, we've talked about kind of the jeopardizing well-being of the family, um, the health of our partners as well. We talked about that a bit earlier with that physical possibility of STDs. But it's not just that. The health of our partner with all the stress that's going on from before discovery, because there's been this stuff going on and they've been adjusting to it, right? This whole time
Yeah.
it's causing stress. Doesn't mean that there's any cognitive understanding of what's going on. It's just, we adjust. We human beings, period. So they've been adjusting all along. That stress causing. We've got the cortisol release. We empty out, the good hormones, the oxytocin, the connection gets emptied out because it's constantly by partners being put out there and put out there and put out there, especially when we as unfaithfuls are disconnecting. Because what do they? Of
Yeah.
course, they want to be connected. Well,
Right.
so they're using this oxytocin up to create that connection, and that can empty out faster than they can replenish it. That can cause serious issues. All of those hormones, adrenaline,
Right.
dopamine, serotonin, which is a mood stabilizer, endorphins, which keeps us calm. All of those are being used up, and in many cases faster than partner's body can replenish those, and that leads to serious can lead to serious health problems, and also emotional health problems. That lack of connection is massive, right? And then with our kids, you talked about the impact on kids. Well, we're living two lives. We're not exactly present for our kids.
Right.
Now, I had a dad who was alcoholic and sex addict, right? And he was never there for us. Granted,
Mm.
my parents were divorced, and who knows how much my mom limited that. I don't know, right? She really, really didn't like it. And so that might have happened, but he wasn't there, right? And so that kind of absence, let's say there are people who their father and mom are still married, but the dad's, acting out, whatever that,
Right.
sex, alcohol, etc. He's not at home connecting with kids. When we're looking
Hmm.
at pornography or out trying to or looking at apps or trying to find the next hit, right? We're certainly not with our kids. I remember being at one of my kids' soccer games, and I was thinking about something else. I wasn't there watching him play.
Yeah.
He was good, but he
Yeah.
could kidding. You think he couldn't feel that? Of course he could.
Well, and that's the thing. I think it can all be summed up in the fact that our choices have so much of a wider impact upon our family than we are aware of. And that's why it gets really tough as we start to digest our choices, as we start to feel the impact. Sometimes it's very easy for us to cascade into shame and hopelessness because we're starting to feel the weight of our choices. But it's actually good for us to feel the weight of our choices. What's important is that as we feel the weight of our choices, we have safe people, we have experts, and we have a plan to walk down that valley. Because partially within that valley is a relapse prevention tool of clarity and consequential reality that a buddy of mine said to me, my own friend that stuck around. We were talking one day, and I was talking about how awful it was and how painful it was for myself because I was still self-absorbed, but also for my family. And he said, "So do you think you'll ever do this again?" And I said, "Man, I don't." I was starting to get healthy enough to say, "Well, I'm not going to just say that I never will because that's kind of stupid, but I sure never want to inflict this pain ever again on my family."
I hear you. And we have this saying in SLAA, well, pretty much any 12-step program, have you bottomed out?
Yeah.
You reached a bottom that you can't, there's no deeper bottom, right? You don't want to end up with being able to look back and go, okay, yeah, I thought I'd hit my bottom, but apparently there was a basement, right?
Yes.
So,
Very true.
okay, so we have to have hit that in order to come back off it. We've dropped way down. This is a nightmare for us, for our families, and then
Everybody.
and that could last a while. And then there's this ah, I get it. I'm starting to get it, and we make this journey up now. But in the meantime, we can lose everything. We lose the respect of our partners, of our kids. We have adult kids who, for a while anyway, will not talk to the unfaithful.
Yeah.
We there's a loss of respect with family of origin very often, right? So we can lose them. We talk so much about the family of origin and the devastation that their actions can wreak, but really too, there's also those families of origin that are really positive and supportive, and we can lose that. Uh,
Yes.
so
Absolutely.
it can be the loss of everything. I hope not. I really do. Um, but we do have to hit that bottom most of the time. Unfortunately, I mean, wouldn't it be great to be able to say, "Oh, there's a signpost. There's a signpost. There's a sign." You know what? I'm going to pay attention to these signposts, which is what we're
Yeah.
hopefully helping people with today if they're in that place, um, without hopefully that they don't have to hit that bottom. But man, when you do hit that bottom, that's definitely I think that it's a hopeful place because as awful as it feels, we can see what can come from it.
And I think those of you watching and listening, our hope is that if you're unfaithful, that you have hit rock bottom and that you would embrace it and say, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get healthy. If you haven't hit rock bottom, we are all concerned for you because you are still a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
And maybe you haven't hit rock bottom, but you're going to hit it very soon. And when you do, I hope you remember these words that we have been saying today, that there is hope and there is opportunity for healing. It's not a guarantee, but the best thing that you can do, I say it this way, you can find the right people, and the right people are going to have the right pathway, and the right pathway is going to lead you to the right opportunity for restoration. Personal restoration at the very least, maybe relational. We don't know. Every situation's different, but it's vital that you feel this pain. I read a book one time, and in the book, it told the story of how a man said to the kid, son, I want you to taste those tears. I want you to feel what this feels like, because the choices that you've made have affected these other boys in this situation. And there's something about us digesting the reality that we are in, because once we digest that reality, now we become aware of our spouse or partner's feelings and emotions. We become aware of our kids if we have them, and everybody that's been caught in the crosshairs of choices. So, as always, James, I'm incredibly thankful. I think your heart continues to come through when we do these podcasts about providing an opportunity for healing, providing an opportunity to not give up all hope, at the very least for our own healing and hopefully for our relationships. So if you want to reach either one of us, reach out to us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. We'd love for you to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.